Hello. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us this evening. I'm Catherine Thornhill. I'm the head bookworm at the ShelterBox Book Club, and I'll be your host for this evening. You'll generally find me interviewing book club authors, but this evening we'll be hearing from Euan Crawshaw, the Director of International Programs at ShelterBox, about the current situation in Myanmar and ShelterBox's plans for a response. This will be followed by our Q&A, but feel free to add your questions from any time from now. Euan Crawshaw has been the head of our international programs for 3 years. Before that, he lived and worked in South Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, Lebanon, Iraq, Myanmar, Colombia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, managing large emergency programs and field and area offices. He has 18 years of experience in humanitarian programs and emergency response, including as the former humanitarian lead at Oxfam and as a country director in the Philippines, and as a member of the Save the Children's Global Emergency Response Team. Thank you so much for joining us, Euan. I'm going to pass over to you now for some insights into the current situation in Myanmar.
Great, thank you, Kat, for the really kind welcome, and thanks to everyone online for joining this webinar, where we're going to be talking about ShelterBox's response to the earthquake in Myanmar. So what I want to just do to start with is provide an overview of what happened. Then I'll talk a little bit about the situation on the ground at the moment in terms of the impact and needs of the population affected. Then I'll talk specifically around Myanmar and why it's proving to be such a challenge in this particular response. And then I'll sort of end by talking through ShelterBox's response to date and some next steps that we're taking. And then looking forward to answering any questions that you might have. So as you'll know, because you're interested in and you've joined this webinar, on Friday the 28th of March, there was a huge earthquake that hit central Myanmar. It was 7.7 magnitude and at a very shallow depth, which means it was particularly devastating. In fact, it was felt hundreds of kilometers away in Bangkok. We will have all seen the videos of the hotels and apartment blocks in Bangkok shaking, and so it affected Myanmar and the region in a really, really large way. This would have had a huge impact on people living in the affected area in terms of their houses or businesses being destroyed. There'll be a lot of people who have lost loved ones, unfortunately. At the moment, we know that 3,500 people have sadly lost their lives. We also, unfortunately, know that that number will increase as the devastation becomes more and more apparent and access to areas that have been affected is enabled. Just for a bit of background, Myanmar already had the 5th largest number of people in need of humanitarian assistance in the world. So to put that in numbers, that's about 1/3 of the population, or 20 million people living in Myanmar who are in need of humanitarian assistance before the earthquake. Now we know that on top of that, due to the earthquake, up to 1 million people have been forced from their homes and been displaced within the country, because this was the largest earthquake to affect Myanmar in the last 100 years. So all in all, a pretty devastating situation for the local population. And this earthquake is one of those disasters that happens where sort of I woke up and looked at the news coming through on my phone, and I thought, okay, this is going to be big. ShelterBox is going to respond to this. So even before we kind of made internal decisions, as director of programs, I was very much of the view that something on this scale and that has this impact and effect is something that ShelterBox needs to respond to. So what's the situation on the ground at the moment like in Myanmar? So it is proving to be a challenge. So as you'll know, Myanmar is in the middle of a civil war and has been since 2021. And that means that access is generally fairly limited across the country. So it's really, really difficult at this stage to get really good, clear information on the areas that have been affected, particularly around Mandalay and in the center of the country. So the full picture really is still to emerge. For other earthquakes previously, you'll probably remember seeing on the news lots of footage and interviews with people affected, etc. And there hasn't been that for this particular disaster, simply because access is incredibly difficult. The number of people that have actually been able to, from the outside world, actually access the affected areas is incredibly limited. And there's also strict controls in terms of who can go to those areas and what information people are able to share. So aid is beginning to get to the affected population, but still not really enough. We know that there are huge needs in shelter, but also need for clean water, for food, for medicine, and for healthcare. Really, across the spectrum, the needs of the population who've been affected by this are absolutely huge. So I used to work in Myanmar in different circumstances about 10 years ago. So I kind of witnessed firsthand how hard it is to kind of get aid to people. And then if you add on top of that, roads being destroyed, airports being shut, the rainy season, which unfortunately has now just started as well, it becomes really, really, really challenging to get aid in to the areas that have been affected. And that coupled with real security challenges. So we know in some of the areas that were affected by the earthquake, the conflict restarted about a day or two after the earthquake had hit. So some of those areas are also still in the middle of ongoing conflict. So it really is a very difficult situation. In terms of our response to date, we sent a team out to Bangkok in Thailand within about 48 hours of the earthquake happening. So it happened on a Friday morning. We met internally on Friday afternoon and agreed to send a team, a ShelterBox response team out to Bangkok. And Bangkok was chosen because obviously relatively easy access. We could fly directly there. And also that's where the agencies who are working in Myanmar have their headquarters currently, and that's where a lot of the coordination efforts take place. So our team have tirelessly been meeting with lots of other people and agencies, as well as local Rotarians for about the past week, trying to get a picture of exactly what's happened and how best ShelterBox can support. So we've had some really encouraging conversations, and we're beginning to develop a plan of our response and what that will look like. In particular, we're currently considering seeing if we can provide tents to people. There's also a need for shelter kits, tarpaulins, household items, as well as water filtration system and hygiene kits. It's likely that we won't be able to do all of those, but those are the kind of things that we're really looking into at the moment in terms of how ShelterBox could respond, because as I said, the shelter needs are absolutely huge. Whatever we do for this response will be done through partner organizations. So organizations on the ground in the affected areas who will actually be delivering and distributing the aid. And we're currently working on identifying those organizations that we're going to work with. We're also still in the process of seeing as to whether we could potentially travel into Myanmar as well. But again, at this particular stage, that is proving quite difficult. So all in all, our team are doing an incredible job on the ground at the moment. We will be responding to this. And day by day, we're sort of adding to the plan as we get more information. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of give you a little view on how ShelterBox are responding to this particular earthquake. We've obviously responded to earthquakes previously, most recently in 2023. We responded to the big earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and also in Morocco, also in 2023. So we've got lots of relevant experience in the team of responding to these earthquakes, and indeed two of the team members that are out in Bangkok also were leading on our responses to the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria as well. So yeah, we're confident that it's in really good hands in terms of the team out on the ground planning the project, and yeah, where we know that we need to act as quickly as we possibly can, because yeah, the scale of need in the areas that have been affected in Myanmar is really huge, and will only increase, unfortunately, as more and more sort of information begins to emerge. So I'll leave that there as an overview. And yeah, looking forward to hearing some of your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's yeah, just like brilliant insight into a really challenging and complex situation. And obviously we're still so early in that like it's an ever-changing situation. So even the emails we sent out last week, like this gives a lot more information. So thank you so much. We've got lots of questions coming in, which is great. And we've got a few questions from people who sent in before as well. We've got one here from Becky Alexander who's asked, what's the Myanmar national response like? Has there been, how much is the country able to support itself?
So the national response in Myanmar has been really good in terms of the kind of local communities around the affected areas and local organisations on the ground there, in terms of coordination and meeting immediate needs. So in disasters like this, it's always the local populations and community members that are the kind of first responders, supporting their loved ones who've been affected. So there are local organisations on the ground who are already responding. The challenge is that they will have limited resources. So therefore, it's now the international community that will be supporting the effort to provide those resources and assistance to be able to meet further needs. And yeah, there is some coordination effort from the military junta in Yangon, and they have also, for the first time in a long time, requested international assistance, which is a very positive sign for the relief efforts. So there are elements of a coordination mechanism in the country, but for all of the challenges I spoke about, it's proving quite hard to get a kind of unified response across the whole country together.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Thank you, Becky. Great question. We've got a few other questions, and I've got a question from previously, somebody who's written in, just about how, this is from Layla, how would working with a partner organisation like the ones you've just mentioned help us to be able to respond more quickly, and what is that route through that partner organisation once we have them?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important in situations like this that we make contact with those agencies that are already on the ground delivering assistance, because we want to make sure that we've got as much up-to-date information as possible in terms of what people's needs are, what they've already received, and therefore what role ShelterBox could play in that. So, for example, if those local organisations came back to us and said, actually, no, household items have already been covered by us or someone else, but actually what people need out of the list that ShelterBox could provide is tents, we would then say, okay, well, that makes sense. We'll look at doing that. So it's really making sure that we get good analysis of the needs on the ground. It's also the question, particularly in this situation, around access and security challenges. So local Burmese people, local Burmese organisations are much better placed to be able to support these local populations. They will be able to potentially negotiate access if they need to. They'll have a really clear view of the security challenges. So in situations like that, that's why we would definitely tend to work with local organisations, because that will enable a much better and a much quicker response.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things I like the most about ShelterBox and our responses is finding ways to communicate with the people who are actually in need and the people who have been supporting them and working with them for years. And so it's not us kind of defining what we think is useful so much as people telling us what is actually useful. Thank you. We've got a few questions here about some of the other organizations we could be working with. So there's a few different questions from a few different people I'm going to pool into one. So Janine's asked about other box-related charities such as Aquabox and Disaster Aid, and Richard's asked about the DEC kind of group of charities and whether we'd be working alongside or with those agencies. And then there's also some questions about Rotary clubs, which I know we're in touch with. So yeah, if you could talk about some of the more international partners that we might be working alongside as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the team in Bangkok, one of their main sort of areas of focus over the past week has been coordination. And so that is with all of the other agencies that would be responding in Myanmar. And that includes a range of both international agencies, you know, some of the names that we'd all recognize, as well as some smaller agencies, and also some of the Burmese agencies have representation in Bangkok as well. So coordination in a disaster like this is really, really crucial and critical. In terms of working with the DEC, so we have been speaking to the DEC members and asking them about their plans, and we're aware that they will then have potentially resources to be able to support as well. So we'll be discussing what they're planning to do for shelter, and whether we could potentially support them in their responses. And yeah, Rotary, as always, have been really, really key to date for us. So we've actually had some really good contact with Rotarians in Bangkok, but also Rotarians in Yangon as well, who have been providing us with really invaluable assistance. So yeah, coordination with all agencies on this is really important.
Yeah, with big disasters like this, it feels like a team effort is really needed. And yeah, actually, an interesting thing that I wonder, I'm not sure of the experience of the audience, but if you could just talk quickly about like the cluster system and the shelter cluster in particular, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So in disasters like this, there is something that's set up called the cluster system. And this is managed by the United Nations. And this is really their coordination meetings, essentially, that pull together all of the agencies working in particular areas. And there are three key things that they say. They say, right, who are you? What are you doing? What do you do? And where are you planning to work? So who, what, where, the three W's. And that information is kind of mapped out from day one of a potential big response to say, okay, so Agency X is planning to work in that particular location and they can provide food. Agency Y is planning to work in another location and they can provide shelter, for example. So ShelterBox attends the shelter cluster, and also as part of that work coordinated efforts, you begin to get a picture of saying, right, if you want to respond with shelter, the suggested standardized package are these items. And this is to make sure that everyone broadly receives the same level of assistance, the same quality of assistance, and also it avoids duplication as well. Mm-hmm. So just very briefly, the cluster system was set up after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, because actually in 2 days after the earthquake in Haiti, because it was such a big mega global event, you already had 300 agencies trying to register with the Haitian authorities to provide assistance after the earthquake. And it was total chaos. It wasn't coordinated in any way. Some families were getting 2 or 3 of some items, other families next door were getting nothing. And it really was a kind of really good intentions. Everyone is pouring aid into the country, but it wasn't coordinated really in a very good way at all. So the humanitarian sector learned from that and said, right, what do we need to have in place if something like this happens again, where actually we can have kind of good coordination and oversight of the response. So that's where the cluster system came from, and it's now active in Bangkok and in Yangon as well, sort of really making sure that the assistance provided is as good as it can be.
Yeah, amazing. And am I right in thinking like a different charity kind of leads the cluster each time? So or is there like one person who's always in charge? There can't be.
No, so it's generally, depending on who's working in the area and has the most information, they would then look to lead the cluster. So ShelterBox has had representation on the global shelter cluster before, so we made sure that that's one of the first things that we're kind of plugged into. So the kind of travel planning for the team, one of their first objectives is find out who's leading the shelter cluster, get their number, give them a call, and go to the first meeting.
Okay, amazing. There was actually a question from Kerr about who is leading the coordination, so I hope that hope that answers that. I kind of jumped in before I read your question. Cool, super. Lots of questions here. actually another one from Becky that's lovely. What do you think the biggest challenge is going to be? You mentioned the rainy season. Will this be the most challenging factor now, or others? Thank you.
It will certainly be one of the challenges in terms of access and understanding that there'll be quite a lot of roads that previously could potentially have been used that will now be out of action due to the rainy season. So I would say that's one of them. I would say another real challenge is if we decide to procure and buy items internationally, getting the permissions we need to send those into Myanmar will be a real challenge, because at the moment that looks really tricky. And then even if we do get the aid into country, making sure that it goes to the right people is also going to be a challenge in this particular context, because you have different groups in charge of different areas, and therefore it's working out who you potentially need to get permissions from and negotiate access with, etc. So yeah, I would say those are the three main things, and all put together probably make it one of the most challenging places to work in the world right now. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't small issues that you've just raised there. So.
No.
Cool. Thank you, Becky, for your question. There was actually a question that sort of followed on. Lovely. Yeah, so Ian asked, do we have significant resources pre-positioned nearby? So you talked about procuring stock and items. Is that coming from pre-positioned hubs, or how would that work for this response?
Yeah, so the items that we have pre-positioned relatively nearby, we have some stock pre-positioned in Kuala Lumpur, also in Dubai as well. And Dubai is a large humanitarian hub, so we're hoping potentially to take access to take an opportunity to get some free air freight transport that may be being used to respond on behalf of lots of other agencies. That's something that we often get in a big disaster. So yeah, we always make sure that we have enough stock pre-positioned in strategic hubs globally, so that we're not sort of sending everything halfway around the world ideally, but we'd be able to get stuff from pre-positioned hubs. For this one, it's likely to be from Dubai.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I remember, was it the Turkey Syria earthquake last year, the year before last, there was an air freight donation from Turkish Airlines, wasn't there, that helped us to bring stock, I think. Yes. I'm trying to check that I remember things correctly. Catherine, Catherine Mead has asked, how big is the ShelterBox team based in Bangkok?
So at the moment we have 4 team members based in Bangkok. That's 1 ShelterBox response team volunteer, and 3 staff members currently, and they're all in Bangkok at least until the end of this month, and then we'll look to see whether we would need to send additional team members or new team members to support the response.
Cool. And there's a question that follows on here from Guy, who says, how much time will the SLT spend in Myanmar, or in Bangkok in this case? And is there an upper limit to how long they would spend there initially?
So we generally say in a response like this, we would need to have resources to manage something for about 3 months. That doesn't mean that the team need to be on the ground for 3 months, because actually, if we set something up with a partner and distributions have started, we can then support remotely if needed. But the time frame generally for a response from something happening to hoping to do first distributions would be about 30 days. That's the kind of target that we're looking at. And yeah, the team will be managing that response for at least that initial period. If there is onward travel to Myanmar, then that would be initially for a short period of time, again, to do coordination meetings and set the project up. But that at this stage is, still to be confirmed.
Cool. Oh my gosh, we're running out of time. And we've got lots of questions. Okay, so I think we do one more question. One more. So this is from Richard Spalding. He said, though Myanmar is clearly a disaster needing urgent action, how do you prioritize between that and other humanitarian issues, for instance, in Sudan? And that's from Richard Spalding, Winchester Rotary Disaster Relief Coordinator.
Yeah, thank you. That is a really good question, and that's something that we consider on a daily basis in terms of where is the best use of ShelterBox resources. Unfortunately, around the world at the moment, I mean, pick your country in terms of shelter needs and where ShelterBox could potentially add value. But you mentioned Sudan there, and we are also responding in Sudan. And yeah, at any moment in time, we have probably somewhere between 12 and 14 programs around the world, and those are both in response to new disasters that occur, like the earthquake in Myanmar, but they're also in response to, unfortunately, ongoing chronic protracted crises like Sudan, Yemen, etc. So yeah, it's quite often we have to make hard decisions in terms of saying, actually, at this particular moment in time, we can't respond to a particular location, but generally we try our best to at least meet some of the shelter needs around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Euan. I'm afraid that is all we have time for this evening. I hope you found the session informative and engaging. We've managed to get through 14 questions, which I think is pretty impressive. And thank you all for your amazing questions. Before we wrap up, I'd like to highlight how you can support ShelterBox in our response to the Myanmar earthquake. So 3 main ways. The first is by donating. Your contributions can make a significant difference in providing essential aid to those affected by the earthquake in Myanmar and also in other disasters across the globe, such as Sudan that we just mentioned. You can fundraise as well, organising events or campaigns to raise funds and spread awareness of ShelterBox's work. And then the third way is just by helping us to spread the word, so sharing our mission and efforts with your network to amplify our reach. So that could be by talking to a colleague, by putting up a poster in your local community centre, or even just by sharing a Facebook post. For more information on how to get involved, please visit our website, or you can reach out to us or send an email to hello@shelterbox.org. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope it provided an interesting insight into ShelterBox's work. And as I say, if you have any unanswered questions that are burning, please do send them to us and we will endeavour to get back to you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Euan. And thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.